GALP.
Back again with another review. This time it's Dynasty Warriors God Seekers, a tactical role-playing game set in the Dynasty Warriors universe, meaning that the characters, the settings, weapons, and character models all remain the same. Before we get into the main bulk of discussion, let's shout out our sponsors, shall we? Japan Crate, Sugoi Mart, Crunchyroll, and J-List. And then let's get into our disclaimer. For you new folks, GALP is a weekly gaming discussion podcast under the GAL network. We talk about all sorts of games from big AAA titles all the way to awesome indie games, but our forte is Japanese games, especially Musou games, so expect that a lot. We can be found basically anywhere that you can get your podcasts, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon, on YouTube now as well, and also on Patreon, where you can get ad-free early access content for all of the podcasts that we do, so be sure to join that. Remember, if you want to join in on the fun, then be sure to follow us on Twitter/X @GalPodcast. Additionally, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok with the same handle as well. If you like what we do here on GALP, please be sure to spread the word. We really do appreciate it. And join our Discord page at getalifepodcast.com/Discord. It's really where we want to cultivate the community and actually have a conversation with you guys, because we can have conversation on YouTube comments, we can have conversation on Spotify comments, but I feel like you can have a real-time conversation on Discord. So if you want that, be sure to join our Discord. Okay, back to God Seekers. This game was a bit of a pain in the ass to research, and for good reason, right? I had to go back through really old press releases from Koei, as well as the Koei website in Japanese, and it was so difficult to find, right? Dynasty Warriors God Seekers isn't actually its Japanese name. Wow, right? Dynasty Warriors in general isn't the Japanese name, it's Sangoku Musou. But I don't know where the God Seekers came from, but technically this is part of the Eiketsuden series. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. A series of games we never got overseas. So I understand the choice to rename it in the same sort of fashion that they renamed Sangoku Musou to Dynasty Warriors, because that was just what made sense. I get the choice to rename it. It's not really a familiar game to a lot of people outside of Japan, so it just makes sense. However, I found out recently that this was a big deal in Japan. It even got a treasure box edition and a multi-platform release. And by multi-platform, I mean Sony exclusive multi-platform. So PS3 release, PS4, and PS Vita. We only got this game available on the Vita and on the PS4 digitally. In Japan, they had physical discs and cartridges for this game as well. It's a big deal in Japan. For those that don't know, this game was seemingly released randomly as a part of the Shin Sangoku Musou 15th anniversary celebration. This game is a fantasy retelling of Zhao Yun's story within the Dynasty Warriors 8 universe. So I can assume that Zhao Yun is the protagonist and poster boy for this game, as the head producer Atsushi Miyauchi is a big fan of the character and considers him his favorite. So I can imagine it was a big honor for him to sort of lead a game in which Zhao Yun is the main protagonist. Many reviewers at the time kind of assumed that this game was a spiritual successor to Dynasty Tactics. However, it isn't, and I'm not going to treat it as such, because I think that's quite unfair. And I think the understanding was because back in the day we used to get Dynasty Tactics. I do remember that there was a lot of people, including some reviewers out there that are quite popular, I'm not going to name them by name, but that they were saying, oh, why did we get this and not a new Dynasty Tactics? I don't think people understood the context behind it, and I don't think a lot of reviewers back then were reading the press releases for this game. I think I was the only one that read it, so I'm going to give you guys a bit of an overview that I think is a bit fair for this game. Previous Eiketsuden series followed the same format as this game, usually with different characters playing the protagonist. For example, Zhuge Liang, Guan Yu, Montari Mori, Cao Cao, Nobunaga. Before God Seekers, the last Eiketsuden game was released in 1998 on Microsoft Windows in form of a CD-ROM. I don't know if you guys remember CD-ROMs. And it focused on Cao Cao, or Cao Cao. Okay, yeah, alright, I'll move on. At the time, I was super excited to play this game because, fun fact, this was my first ever review code from Koei. You're like, what? Bitch, that doesn't make sense. You've been talking about Koei games for like millions of years now. Okay, at least 15 years now. But back in the day, I never used to get review codes. I used to buy the games myself. So before 2017, I was actually purchasing the games for review on the podcast. And I was really, really humbled and delighted to review this game because it was the first. And I was like, oh wow, Koei senpai has noticed me. And I think that's kind of where the real sort of professional relationship with Koei began, and one that we still maintain to this day. So thank you, Koei, for giving us a review code all those years ago. Oddly enough, at the time, Nathan was still working at Koei, and he didn't realize that this was my first ever review code. And I think he had assumed that I got review code from Chin in the past. However, Chin, back in the day, was community manager. So he would have had codes for community events and to giveaways and stuff like that, but not for creators and press. And I never got in contact with their press manager until Nathan joined. And it was a bit weird because I went up to Chin and I was like, hey Chin, I want to do another episode with you to talk about Samurai Warriors. And I think it was Samurai Warriors 4 at the time, because I think that was around the time Nathan joined. Maybe he joined slightly after, but this was at MCM Expo. And then Chin looks at me and he was like, I don't do podcast appearances anymore. I don't do any press appearances anymore. I was like, okay Chin, I'm sorry. He was like, no, you don't need to apologize. And then he was like, but you speak to Nathan. I was like, who the fuck is Nathan? So he introduced me to Nathan, and I'm like, wait a minute, this guy is like my age. Who is this guy? And then we did some content with Nathan, and that's where the relationship and friendship began. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I don't think Koei even had a content creator code request form even set up at the time. It had one for press, but not for content creators. Anyway, enough of the nostalgia bish. Let's get back into God Seekers. At the time of my initial review, I didn't know what to expect from this title. It had Dynasty Warriors in the name, and the characters and the weapons were very, very similar, but I wasn't familiar with the style of gameplay. At this point, I'd never played turn-based strategy games, never even played Fire Emblem until Fire Emblem Three Houses. And you're wondering, why did I mention Fire Emblem Three Houses? This game isn't a Fire Emblem game, but I will say this, I have a feeling that Koei Tecmo may have used this game as a testbed in preparation for Three Houses, as they helped develop the game with intelligent systems. In fact, actually, Koei did bulk of the programming and developing for Three Houses. And in fact, not many people know this, Three Houses is running in the same engine as Dynasty Warriors 8 and as Dynasty Warriors God Seekers. Not many people know that, so I'm just going to let you guys know. By this point, the Eiketsuden series hadn't seen a new entry for 18 years, so it kind of gave Koei some sort of creative freedom, I think, to do as they please. Most of the Musou fan base wouldn't remember this original series because, well, Eiketsuden ended pretty much before Musou began, so it makes a lot of sense to use the Musou name to help drive sales for this series. And honestly, I agree. I think that's a perfect move. And I think if Koei didn't do that, I don't think any of us would be interested in playing this game at the time or even now. Also, I don't think we would have ever seen this game make its way to the West if it wasn't for the Shinsangoku Musou anniversary of 15 years. I don't know why I phrased it like that, but you know, I'm not going to delete that. I'm just going to leave that in there. There's also another discussion that could be had where maybe Koei decided to sort of release this so that people can put them on the map for this style of game. Because a lot of people might not know that Koei make turn-based strategy RPGs like this, right? I don't think a lot of people would know that. And bear in mind, when the announcement for Three Houses would have come out, people would be like, what? Koei? The people that make Musou games are making this game. How is this going to work? I kind of feel like maybe this game would have given people the confidence in Koei early on if they had played it. But unfortunately, it wasn't marketed well. When it got a PlayStation Store release, Koei kind of hid it under the rug. And I think to this day, no one even wants to mention it. And it's kind of like the pariah of Dynasty Warriors. It's a spin-off game at the end of the day, but not one that's well recognized or even well loved. So we're going to go on a little break before we get onto the meat and potatoes of Dynasty Warriors God Seekers and sort of tear it apart a little bit, but not in a bad way, just in a good way so you can manage it a little bit more. Anyway, see you guys on the other side of the ad break. If you've got a Patreon, you don't get ads, so awesome. See you guys in a bit.
Patreon. Patreon.com/GALP podcasts. Be sure to join our Patreon for access to episodes early. You will get verbal shout outs during podcast mid-rolls like this one. Access to our GAL only Discord, as well as podcast pilot previews. There are 3 tiers. There's a £3 a month tier, there's a £5 a month, and you get everything if you get that £10 a month tier. We really would love for you guys to join. It's all right if you don't. It does help out the show. It does help us run the lights on the podcast as well. So we really do appreciate it, even if you can. And even if you can't join our Patreon, make sure that you guys give the show a 5-star rating, as well as sharing it on all your social platforms, sharing it with your friends, sharing it with your aunties, sharing it with your grandma. Why not? Enjoy the podcast, share it around. It helps us sort of get further up in the algorithm and actually be able to run more ads, because we get more opportunities that way. So thank you for supporting the show, guys. Whether or not you want to subscribe on Patreon, we love you all the same. Anyway, back onto the ads. Crunchyroll. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Crunchyroll, longtime sponsor. You can go to getlifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll. Once again, that's getlifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll for a 14-day free trial of Crunchyroll Premium. What does that mean? It means you get ad-free anime with the largest anime selection across any platform. You can watch it on your PlayStation 5, Xbox, Amazon Fire Stick, you name it. That is the entire Crunchyroll library, ad-free. Watch new episodes shortly after they come out in Japan. Stream on 4 devices at a time. Offline viewing for only £60 a year. Amazing. Go to getlifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll. That's getlifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll. Thank you, Crunchyroll, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. J-List. getlifepodcast.com/J-List. That's getlifepodcast.com/J-List. Use the code GAL for
5%
off anything at J-List, and that includes everything that J-List and J-Box has to offer. So that's gifts, calendars, books and magazines, manga and doujins, anime figures, apparel and cosplay, games and anime, otaku and ecchi goods as well, guys. So go to J-List, that's jlist.com, check what they have to offer and buy it there. They really have a good selection of everything. Currently at the moment, J-List is offering special orders and price matching, which means you can actually request from J-List any specific items that you want, and they can actually go and get it for you from Japan. That's actually how J-List originally started, if I'm not mistaken. We did an episode with Peter Payne, the founder of J-List, so we're actually really happy to have the sponsorship going on like we did before. They also do price matches. There is information on their website. Go to jlist.com and you can find it on their blog. Remember, once again, that's getlifepodcast.com/Jlist and use the code GAL for
5%
off on everything on the website. Thank you, J-List, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Friendly reminder, guys, to join us on our Discord, getlifepodcast.com/Discord. We have all this amazing stuff that's going on at the moment. Dedicated anime channels, dedicated gaming channels, as well as places for you guys to share your content as well. We love to spread that around, so make sure that you join our Discord. That's getlifepodcast.com/Discord, as well as sharing the podcast on whatever platform you're using. If you're using Spotify, make sure that you guys are engaging with our Q&As and our polls, and just giving us a 5-star review on any podcast platform that you guys are listening to. There should also be a new feature if you are using Anchor and Spotify in general. You can send us an audio note and we'll listen to it on the podcast, and it's a great way for you guys to get directly engaged with us, which is always awesome, as well as checking us out on X at Gal Podcast, as well as on Instagram, once again at Gal Podcast, and on TikTok at Gal Podcasts. So, God Seekers. At the time, I was really new to strategy games, and I'll be honest, I did find it incredibly easy to jump into this game without any complications, because it's relatively simple. Or so I thought. It is quite difficult even on lower difficulties, and I think if you're not used to this type of game, you might struggle a little bit, right? It's not as forgiving as Fire Emblem on lower difficulties. Oftentimes, strategy isn't considered when playing a Musou game. And despite this game's name, it's not a Musou game. Even though this game is called Shinsangoku Musou Eiketsuden, or Dynasty Warriors God Seekers, it's not a Dynasty Warriors game. It feels quite bizarre, right? It's almost a bizarro Dynasty Warriors game, because, or maybe like a Dynasty Warriors in a separate universe, because all of the assets in this game are reused, right? From the character models to animations. The maps, in fact, were taken from Dynasty Warriors 8 Empires, which is incredible, because the Empires games tend to have more open spaces to work with. Even costume and DLC cross over from Dynasty Warriors 8. The game recognizes if you have save data from Dynasty Warriors 8, which is an excellent piece of fan service, right? You wouldn't have expected a game like that to give you all of that, right? And that's sort of stuff that kind of goes unnoticed. A lot of people didn't mention that in their reviews at the time, which is kind of weird, right? But it's nice to see. And like I said, it might have also played a part of, hey, this is a bit of an incentive to purchase this game, etc. The music, I'll say this, is quite Dynasty Warriors, but not really. Same, but different.
You know, I was expecting to hear the Dynasty Warriors victory music, but instead I'm greeted with this epic fanfare, which I can only assume is from the original Eiketsuden series. I don't know, I've never played Eiketsuden. Much like earlier games in the Eiketsuden series, it's turn-based, with the map split into a grid similar to Fire Emblem and similar to other games like that. That's a genre staple for those kind of games. However, unlike Fire Emblem, the game doesn't have multiple endings or permadeath features, which makes sense because there's only one real ending in Shin Sangoku Musou, right? And also, you're following the Three Kingdoms story. Those characters would usually die within their own timelines. They get old age or they die in battle, etc. So there's no real need to have permadeath in this game. Although it would have been nice to see a separate mode in which would almost be like a free mode where you can go through Zhao Yun's story or any character story or have a character creation and go through that. They could have added that, but that would have added to costs. But I'm just riffing here, you know? There are also features in this game that I think are a bit overwhelming. For example, skill tree. Having to go through this for every single character is a bit annoying and too much, to be honest. I'm not a real fan of skill trees in Koei games that aren't JRPGs or Souls-like games. But if we're going to implement such a thing, I would have preferred one with 20 skills tops, similar to Samurai Warriors 5. This game didn't need to be this complex, but I find myself spending a lot of time in menus trying to build out the skill tree or visiting the merchant to improve my weapons, etc. And when I say visiting the merchant, it's a menu. You don't even get to see a merchant there. Like in previous games, you'll have like a little merchant, even if it's like a JPEG of a merchant. You don't even get that. The game is fully voice acted, I'll say that. But like I said, you don't have the merchant, you don't have the shopkeeper, you don't have any of these kind of things, and it kind of feels a bit dead. You know, it feels a bit soulless in that sense. And I can understand the sea of menus because this is a budget title created for an anniversary. And mind you, I don't know if it was in Koei's original plans to even have English language support and to publish this in the UK. I don't know whose decision it was, but it was a good one nevertheless. I did say it was a budget title, but this game is currently on the PlayStation Store for £50. And on top of that, it hasn't gone into sale once. It hasn't gone down since 2017. I think at this point, they should give it a new permanent price of £20 to £25. I think that's quite fair, considering its age and the amount of content that you get in this game. Because at the moment, this is a barrier for people not to actually play this game, and I can genuinely see this game as a way to bring more people into the Musou genre. Equally would bring in a lot of people into this strategy genre, and I'm one of them. This game made me want to try out games like Fire Emblem, and I fell in love with games like Fire Emblem, so I have a new sort of appreciation that I never had initially while playing this game. Whilst playing, I've noticed that attacks that affect multiple squares on the grid won't let you move forward if that enemy is defeated, which is kind of poor, considering that Dynasty Tactics and other strategy games by Koei had this feature implemented. However, this might be a standard practice for the Eiketsuden series, and there's no real way for me to know without playing those Japan-only releases. And to be fair with you, I'm not going to open an emulator and play those games because there's a lot of kanji in them, and I can't. Look, my Japanese skill is okay, but kanji is very difficult for me. So, you know, I'm not going to be able to play that game properly. However, that's just a small gripe in the grand scheme of things, and it doesn't really take away from its excellent core gameplay. Currently, there are 61 playable characters, as this game focuses on Zhao Yun's story. It doesn't really interact with all the playable characters in Dynasty Warriors 8, the 130 odd characters, most of which were present for major battles from the Yellow Turban Rebellion all the way to Ujang Plains. Although it's nice to have other characters, Zhao Yun, at the end of the day, is the main focus of the story. So, as a player, I tend to focus on leveling him up, getting up his skill tree, as well as his companions within Shu, right? Because they're the main focus. Combat is quite interesting, I will say that. As you're able to make multiple attacks in one move, combat is quite interesting as you're able to make multiple attacks in one turn per character, permitted that you have enough actions per move. Each attack will take a different amount of actions depending on strength. Musou does return in this game, but purely as a beefed up special attack, reusing the original animations from Dynasty Warriors 8, which is nice to see in battle because it breaks up the monotony a bit, right? It gets you a little bit hyped up to finish the battle at hand and to actually play the next story mission. There is also something known as synchro moves. It's equivalent, I'd say, to Musou Rage in previous games. Once the synchro gauge fills up, after defeating enemies, you can perform with another ally a synchronized attack. Ooh, I guess that's why it's called the synchro move. Yeah, that's the reason it's called that. And those attacks can deal up to 40% additional damage, as well as allowing for further movement of your characters on the battlefield. Great to use in a pinch, or you can use it strategically to wipe out 5 or 6 groups of enemies at once. I'm not a fan of how you need to mash the button in order to determine the bonus damage, because, you know, that gets tiring a little bit quickly. And it feels like a bit of an annoying mini game, you know? Kind of like, remember like Budokai games, and you just like mashing buttons and like just like destroying your analog sticks? It kind of felt like that, and I didn't like that. And I felt like it was out of place because no other strategy game has that element in there, and it felt a bit childish. So Koei could have removed it, but I understand why they didn't, because it brings something different, you know? Speaking of something different, the gameplay loop is pretty much a loop. It's not different. It's always going to be the same. I don't know what more to say, right? It's pretty much the same as you follow the story. At the beginning of a chapter, you play a main scenario, often featuring the new allies that you'd gain during that chapter. Then you go back and grind everyone up, level everyone up, playing through smaller scenarios, which are basically the same battle that you would have experienced before, because they use the same battlefields, but different characters and like generics, NPCs and all of that. Then, when you're ready, you can decide to take on another main story battle, and that will end the chapter. The game is pretty short because of this, taking around 20 to 40 hours depending on how many filler missions and how much grinding you'd like to do. All in all, I really do love this game, but I can't recommend it for everyone, especially if you're a Musou fan, right? Because you might not like it. If you are a Musou fan that loves Fire Emblem, however, it might be for you. But the game in general doesn't seem worth the £50 price tag in 2024. It wasn't worth it back then in 2017. And I instead feel that this game should retail for less. Or, at the time, it should have been bundled in with older Dynasty Warriors titles. Considering this was a 15th anniversary thing, Koei should have done a 15th anniversary Shin Sangoku Musou HD collection. I'm sorry, I'm going to say this in every Musou episode because we need it, we want it. Come on, Koei. Come on, Koei, I want it, man. No, I want it. I think a lot of fans want it as well, but we're kind of tired and sick of saying it, you know, and at this point we're not going to get it. But it would have been a great move for them to say, hey, guess what? For $50, you get this new Eiketsuden game, as well as Dynasty Warriors 2, 3, 4, and 5 bundled in. I think that would have been worth it. 100%. But yeah, we're never going to see that. We might have to wait for the next anniversary to get a Dynasty Warriors HD remaster, or probably a Dynasty Warriors 10 at this point. Back onto, I was going to say All-Stars, back onto God Seekers. If this game ever goes on sale, definitely pick it up to experience it. Musou fans will know the story well, and like I said, I do know the story well, so I like to play this game to clear my mind. Maybe have a podcast in the background as I try and relax for the evening. Right? The game allows you to truly disconnect, and personally, I would love to see Koei bring back the Eiketsuden series, but using a completely different story. Something unique, you know? And don't just call it Dynasty Warriors Eiketsuden, right? Don't call it God Seekers, just call it Eiketsuden. I think we've gone past the point where we need to translate Japanese titles. Just keep it as Eiketsuden, right? Bring it back using a different story, something unique, as I mentioned. Because this series could be Koei's answer to Fire Emblem. If they really tried, they could make it something amazing. And considering now that Koei has experience working on mainline Fire Emblem titles, I'm sure that if they wanted to, they could make Eiketsuden this amazing series that could rival Fire Emblem. But at the same time, it's like, do they really want to do that? Do they want to ruin their relationship with Nintendo? There's so many other politics stuff that goes back as well, but at the same time, it's not like they're doing a new IP. They're reviving something that's old, that's always been there in Koei's history. So I kind of feel like Koei could get away with it if they made it like an original series or something like that. I think in this sense they might have gotten away with it because it's Musou and, you know, it's using IP that they already have. It makes sense. I get that. But I really do want to see them do more with it. And I think as a Koei fan base, we have kind of gotten a bit worn out from the Sangokushi and Sengoku stories. And I would like to see them take on another era or other locations within the worldwide history. It's a conversation that I had and enjoyed with Chris Gildart recently, and we both feel like something like a change of scenery would inject new life into Omega Force and Koei Tecmo from a Musou perspective, as well as potentially seeing revival of series that are dead and gone, like Eiketsuden and Kessen, right? Because Kessen had that treatment, it got a change in scenery and a change in era, and then we got Bladestorm from it. If you guys want to hear our thoughts on it, let me know, and I'm going to invite Chris for a beefier discussion on the future of Musou as a whole. Until then, I just want to thank our sponsors, Sugoima, Crunchyroll, Japan Crate, and J-List. In addition to that, let us know what you guys think about this series, as well as other Dynasty Warriors series as we kind of go through Musou May as well. Let us know in the comments on YouTube, on Spotify, on our Discord, as well as our Twitter @GalPodcast. We'll see you guys next time.